Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Linode and Direct Mail. I'm John Voorhees, and with me, of course, is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I mean, we've had some busy days over at MacStories, and it's been a lot of fun. I mean, it's interesting because this time of year is so weird. There's like no news whatsoever, but we've seen a lot of big app releases coming out, and I don't know. It's gotten me thinking about the second half of the year. I feel I kind of consider this the second half of the year because this is like the part of the year leading up to WWDC. And it is a time when we see an awful lot of updates coming out. You know, you wrote about Fantastical recently. Mm-hmm. I've got an Overcast story ready to go. Not sure whether it'll be out by the time this show is released or not. But there've been a bunch of updates and things coming out. And it got me to thinking a little bit about the different things that we see in apps now that we're a good 6 months out from last year's WWDC. What features are being implemented by developers? What features do we think are the most important? What features do we wish more people would implement, and that kind of thing? So I thought maybe we could talk about that today.
It's been a busy few weeks for apps at MacStories, which got me thinking about. I mean, obviously, I'm always thinking about like what are the best apps for me. What's the
right?
I'm all about optimizing the tools that I use. You know, I think we all are. And so you came up with this idea, which I think is a really good angle because we talk about apps, like specific apps. When we do the special episodes where we cover, for example, 2 apps in a single episode, but we tend to talk about the full picture of a specific app, like what's good in Reader or what's good in working copy and stuff like that. This is a different spin on that conversation. We often mention in our reviews like this is a modern app that takes advantage of the latest iOS and iPadOS features. But what are those features exactly? And what are those technologies that we're looking for in a modern app?
Right, exactly. What does it mean to be a modern iOS or iPadOS app these days? And as you might imagine, we have some thoughts about this. And I don't know, maybe I want to kick it off with something super basic that a lot of apps are doing already. But I want to talk about iCloud Sync just a little bit because this is, and I guess we should be careful in terminology here because we're not talking about like iCloud Drive document sync, right? We're talking about CloudKit Sync, which is really, I think got off to a bit of a slow start on iOS, but I've really seen it picked up by a lot more apps now, and I've been really happy with it. For me, it's been reliable and it's been fast. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, this is different from iCloud Drive document sync,
right,
which is what happens when apps actually store their files and documents as actual files and documents in iCloud Drive, and you can go into your iCloud Drive section of the Files app, and you can see the special folder with the icon of that specific app, and you can see the documents inside, which is what, for example, Scriptable does, right? It stores scripts in iCloud Drive. What we're talking about is the CloudKit data sync. So it's data storage powered based on your iCloud account that can be implemented invisibly, sort of, in apps so that you don't have to ever see documents or files in iCloud Drive, and the app never asks you for any kind of additional authentication. It just works. As long as you're signed into iCloud on your device, then you will be able to use CloudKit Sync. One excellent example of this would be the Read Later account in Reader, which is based on CloudKit, and it just works in the background. It's got it's fast. It works without you even knowing that it's on, and it syncs data across all of your Apple devices, from the iPhone to the iPad to even the Mac. And and of course, developers can also use this for Apple TV and watchOS. It works everywhere, and it doesn't require you to open settings and say yes, I want to log into my iCloud account. It just, again, as long as it's on and your iCloud account is enabled in the device preferences, CloudKit Sync will work. And it's in my experience, it's been really good. Like, I haven't seen any conflict related issues, like you made changes to this document on another device, and now you need to manually resolve this conflict. That stuff usually happens with iCloud Drive document sync. Never happens basically for me with CloudKit.
Yeah, that's been my experience with it too. And I think, this kind of goes hand in hand with my preference for using apps that are similar on all platforms. So, if I'm going to be using an iOS or iPadOS app, I want it to be on the Mac as well. And, like Fantastical, which you just reviewed, is a great example of this because it has a very consistent UI and user experience across all of its platforms. And it's on the watch, it's on the iPad, it's on the iPhone, it's on the Mac, it's on everything. And sync to me is that same sort of thing because it's not a lot of benefit to be on all the platforms if the data that you're creating in that app on any particular one platform isn't everywhere and everywhere consistently and quickly. So to me, that's a big issue as well, and something that I like to see. Almost related to that as well is getting information in and out of apps. And here I'm specifically thinking, first of all, about extensions because, extensions, when did we get extensions? Was it iOS 8? I want to say. Yeah, it was 8. And they were a little slow to take off. If you remember, they were a little more limited back in iOS 8. And one of the things that has always driven me a little crazy with extensions is that sometimes the data that you're sending from one place to another can take different forms. Like the easiest example probably is a link because it can be represented as a link, a URL, or also as text. And not all apps handle that gracefully. And I really appreciate when I run across an app that does a good job of anticipating how I'd like to see that data used in a particular app instead of failing in some way. And I still feel like it's a little too frequent that an extension doesn't handle things the way I want it to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's gotten better over the years, especially in iOS 13 with the new share sheet, where you can actually configure the type of format that you want to share something as. So like from Safari, for example, you can share a page as a link or as a PDF or as a web archive, and you can configure that from the share sheet. But of course, all of this is built upon the assumption that the apps you want to use actually offer extensions. And there's in iOS 13, there's still two types of extensions that apps can provide. A share extension, which would be the actual icon of the app that you see in the upper section of the share sheet, right under your contact suggestions. And those are extensions built to share something, not necessarily to share like to a social network, although that's one of the primary use cases, but also to, like, for example, append some text to an existing note, or to save a web page in a file manager, for example. And then there's actions, which are the new vertical list of actions down below in the share sheet. And that's also where your shortcuts live, for example. And those are, in theory, more complex types of actions that do something or bring up a more complex UI within the context of the app that you're sharing from. So, for example, from Amazon, something that I do all the time from when I buy something on Amazon, I go to my order webpage and I share the page with the add to deliveries extension. That's an action that takes a look at the contents of the web page and ingests the Amazon order URL, and from that it's able to assemble a tracking link that talks directly to Amazon. So later in the deliveries app, that specific delivery is constantly updated because it's got a direct Amazon order URL. So that's an example of like an action can actually, for example, from Safari, they can take a look at the entire DOM, the entire structure of the page, and do something with it. And there's so many examples of more complex actions that you can have. And I think it is so important for apps to be able to receive data. These sort of interoperability between apps by way of the share sheet. I think it's one of the It's always a work in progress. It's still not perfect. The share sheet and the entire extension system, it's still, could still be improved, could still be clarified a bit more. But I think it's so important for apps to be able to have multiple ways to get the data in.
Right. And to do it in a way that's configurable. One that I think of that I've just started using because of your must-have apps article is raindrop.io. And it has, when you share, for instance, a web page with it, you can pick what category it's going to be, which collection you're going to put it in, and you can drill down into those menus and figure out, and configure a bunch of different things, add your hashtag, that sort of thing. A lot of apps don't go that extra mile, and I really appreciate it when I see something that does that as well. Mm-hmm. I guess related to would be exporting information, and this is where I'll pick on Notion just a little bit because I had the experience of trying to get some text out of it recently that you and I were moving a project out of Notion and just into Notes, and it does have an export feature, but because of the way it's kind of more like a web app, it bundles up all the text and all the images and other things that you've put in a Notion document into a zip file. And for just trying to get the text out, it was a cumbersome process, and I didn't like it. So I do appreciate it when apps give me a little bit easier way to get my information out if I decide it just needs to be either it needs to be processed in a different app, or I'm just switching apps and I want to move from one thing to another. I mean, I think like podcast players do a really good job with this because they just, send around an OPML file, and that makes it really easy to move from, like, say, Overcast to Castro to Pocket Casts, whatever you want to do. And I think that in the long run, while that makes it easier for people to leave apps, I think it also helps keep customers happy. And, if an app's not right for someone, why make it hard for them to leave? I get why, I suppose, but I do appreciate it when it's easy for me both to move my data around and also get it in as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Which is why I use a text editor that stores markdown files as actual plain text files in iCloud Drive. That would be i8 Writer. Yeah, it's super easy to move to something else. Dark mode, I mean, this is an obvious one. It's a new native feature in iOS and iPadOS 13, also available on the Mac since Mojave, I want to say.
Yes.
And I mean, apps should offer dark mode so that when you switch your device to dark mode, an app that you're using also follows the same theme. And I would just, this is an obvious one, but I would add something a little more specific. Ideally, I want to be able to choose between a pure black mode, which looks great on OLED, and some other dark colors, whether it's a dark gray or dark blue, something that, it's not pure black. And I mention this because, first of all, the iPhones have an OLED display. The iPads do not at the moment. And also some people do not like pure black themes on OLED displays because of issues with
it's like a tearing type of thing.
Yeah. So some people do not like that, and I understand why. So I think it's important to offer multiple dark themes. And I think apps like Apollo, for example, I believe has a toggle in its settings to say use pure black or not, and you can use something else if you want. And Fantastical also does this right in the sense that not only it's got a combination of multiple dark colors, but also, this is the second point that I wanted to mention, I want to be able to choose whether I want to manually override the light or dark settings. So, for example, I want to be able to, if I want to, use a specific app in dark mode, even if my iPhone is not in dark mode. So I want to be able to manually override and say, even if it's dark mode, I always want to be able to use light mode and vice versa. And Fantastical has an entire section in settings where you can say, what theme do you want to use when it's light mode and which theme do you want to use when it's dark mode? And I think this is the right way to go.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to go too. I typically will leave my things so that they are following whatever I have set in for the system, but it is nice to have the choice. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. Whether you're working on a personal project or managing your enterprise's infrastructure, Linode has the pricing, support, and scale you need to take your project to the next level. They have 11 data centers all over the world, including their newest data center in Sydney, Australia. And with their enterprise-grade hardware, S3-compatible storage option, and their next-generation network, Linode delivers the performance that you expect at a surprisingly good price. Get started on Linode today with a $20 credit for listeners of this show, and you'll get access to native SSD storage, a 40 gigabit network, and industry-leading processors, a revamped cloud manager built on an open-source single-page app, root access to your server along with API version 4 and a Python CLI. Nanode plans start as low as $5 too. And there's a whole lot more. Just go to linode.com/appstories and use the promo code appstories2020 when creating a new Linode account and get that $20 credit towards your next project. Oh, and you know what? Linode is looking to hire people too. So if that's something that you're interested in, go to linode.com/careers to find out more. One last time, that URL for a $20 credit is linode.com/appstories and the promo code appstories2020. Our thanks to Linode for the support of the show. Let's move on to context menus, because this is a very new thing and one that I've really used a lot more and enjoyed a lot more than I really anticipated I would when it was first announced. And I think the first app for me that really clicked with context menus was IA Writer, because there's a lot going on under the hood with the IA Writer, and the app does a great job of hiding the complexity so that when you're writing, you don't have to be looking at a bunch of buttons that are for doing things that you only need to do occasionally. But it also meant that there was a fair amount of back and forth through different levels of settings and things that you might want to do with a particular document. But with context menus, you can kind of flatten that hierarchy by long pressing on your document or in the library and getting all the options in one context menu, including doing things like deleting and so forth. I mean, it's a really nice way to do it, and I like having the option to do this on the iPhone too, and far fewer apps are doing that right now.
Yeah, I don't ever want to see a custom context menu ever again.
No, I don't either.
Developers. So get on board with the long press gesture, because I think it's one of the most useful enhancements to UI kit in general that Apple has done in recent years. This unification of when you long press something and you don't let go, which means you either want to start drag and drop, for example, you want to show this menu. You want to show a context menu with actions related to the content that you're selecting. And I would also add that it's not just about supporting context menus, but it's also about supporting all the features of context menus, which include destructive actions, usually associated with like removing items or deleting items. And these destructive actions, they have a red label, and they may require an additional confirmation step. Because again, if you're deleting a file, you want to be able to show a red button in there and have an additional confirmation from the user. And also context menus, they do support multiple levels of navigation, which means you can have sub-menus. You can have items that take you to a second layer of the context menu. So this is useful if you have a lot of options in your app and you want to make sure that all of these options are exposed to the user in a single context menu, but they don't necessarily fit, and you don't want to make the context menu too tall because it gets, the preview then that's associated with the context menu cannot be big enough. Well, you can stack multiple options together and display a second level of the context menu.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you can do submenus, and I think it's important for developers to really think through how those things are grouped and what things are in submenus and what things are in the top level, because it can make a real difference when it comes to the user experience. It reminds me, especially when you mentioned the the custom context menus that people were doing. It reminds me of the days when we had custom share sheets, which, were filling a real need that people had, which was the ability. I remember them especially in things like, I think it was Unread, which had a custom share sheet that allowed you to send stories to read it later services and that sort of thing. And that stuck around for a long time. And I wouldn't be surprised if the custom context menus stick around for a long time too, because I'm sure it's a lot of work to implement one of those on your own, but I think even if that work's been done, it's best to kind of go with the system version now, because that's what people really expect more than anything else.
Yeah, it's like when developers had to drop custom share menus when the share sheet first came around. Like, it's the right thing to do. Drop your custom thing and use the system one, unless you have a really, really specific use case, like or like you're a really big company and you think you can override whatever Apple thinks is the default. For example, YouTube as a custom share menu still, but it's true, YouTube and it's Google, and they can probably afford it because they know better. But otherwise, if you're an indie developer, you probably want to follow Apple's directions here.
All right, Federico, talk to me about shortcuts, because keyboard shortcuts.
Okay,
keyboard shortcuts. Let's start with those, because I know that you love to use your keyboard and not reach out and touch your iPad if you can avoid it. And I feel exactly the same way. But I know that, while we've seen a lot of uptick in the use of keyboard shortcuts in iPadOS apps, it's not always quite as complete as I think you or I would like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to see all apps on iPads support keyboard shortcuts. And not only that, so it's not just keyboard shortcuts in the sense of, you can trigger a bunch of features with Command Shift something. Keyboard navigation, I think it's becoming increasingly important, especially as we're seeing more and more people use an iPad Pro as a sort of like a desktop computer with an external trackpad or a mouse and a stand. I think it's important to make sure that users don't touch the screen at all times to interact with an app. And I would say take a look at what things an Agenda have done with keyboard navigation on iPad. Yep. It's not just about keyboard shortcuts. It's also about being able to control almost the entire UI from the keyboard with a combination of search, for example, that you can start searching and then you can navigate those search results with the arrow keys, or even just being able to select items in the app without touching the screen. So again, using the arrow keys, or perhaps having a shortcut that highlights items in the sidebar. And so you can navigate, if you have a sidebar, you can navigate between different sections of the app without touching the screen. Again, I think that's paramount at this point, to be able to tell the user, you don't have to constantly reach out with your fingers to touch a screen. Just leave your hands on the keyboard and you can still use our app. And then you can also have a bunch of shortcuts for specific functions.
Yeah, I think the navigation thing is the aspect that's missing from far too many apps, because you're right. Whether you're moving through a list of tasks or trying to go from section to section in an app, it's just the apps are few and far between that actually let you do that kind of thing, which is too bad, but hopefully we're getting there. I mean, keyboard shortcuts have been on the rise, I think, pretty steadily over the last couple of years, and I'm hoping that we see more of that as well. Should we talk about multi-windowing and multitasking? I think I want to talk mostly about multi-windowing, I think. Because
I mean, at this point, split view and slide over, I think most apps do support.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, of course, then there are your handful of big apps that people that don't like to do that, and we know who those offenders are, but from big companies. But multi-windowing is still very new, and I think that the obvious use case is you want to use multiple windows of the same app. What I find difficult is that too many apps don't let you kind of customize what those views are from one window to the other, right? I mean, I know this was one of your criticisms of Fantastical, which is a great release, but the multi-windowing left a little bit to be desired.
Yeah, I know that this has been a lot of work for developers. There's a new technology called Scenes that allows developers to support multiple windows. But I think it's really important to study how this works and to put in the work, because what I'm seeing so far is in a bunch of apps, not just Fantastical, a lot of limitations regarding how you can modify the contents of different windows. So let's start from the priority. Like, how should multi-window work? Ideally, multi-window should work in the sense that you should be able to either display different types of content in multiple windows from the same app, or display the same content in multiple windows. So the letter would be an example, the same document in two windows side by side. So maybe you can have the document scrolled at the top in one window and the same document scrolled at the bottom in another. But also, I think so many apps do not let you do things like, again, let's take a look at Fantastical. My problem with Fantastical on iPad is that, yes, you can create multiple windows, but those multiple windows cannot have separate view options, because what you set in one window, such as, for example, whether you want to see the sidebar or not, or
Right.
the calendar set that you choose to load, that becomes a global setting that's applied to all windows currently open from Fantastical on your iPad. And I think that's not the best way to go, because you should be able to say, look, in this window, I want to see this calendar and I want to show the sidebar. But in another window, I want to choose a different view, I want to hide the sidebar, and I want to load a different calendar set. And that's the entire point, right? Because you have multiple windows, therefore you should be able to actually make them different, because there's multiple ones of them. And I think it's damaging to the user experience to have this limitation of, yes, you can open multiple windows, but they are all essentially going to look the same. It really does no good in terms of, like, you have this additional complexity, but at least, you're trading that complexity for so much more freedom in terms of the views and the different content that you can see. This way, you just have the complexity of multiple windows, but very little advantage.
Right. And I think, I understand that these are not easy things to implement. And what we're suggesting, I think, is making it even more complex for developers. Because, for instance, I think one of the only apps I've seen do the same document open in two places at once is GoodNotes, where you can be at the top and bottom of the same document at the same time. And I know from talking to at least one developer, there are definitely complexities and issues that occur there when you're making changes in two places at one time and dealing with conflicts and synchronizing between those. But I can imagine that if you're working on your iOS review and you're in a long chapter that's maybe, 6,000-7,000 words long, it could be really nice to be at the top of one part of it, reading about, as almost as reference material for something you're editing down below. And that would be that would be a fantastic use case.
Do you have any other examples of multi-window that you want to call out? Because I don't use the feature much at this point, because most apps have these limitations.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing which is unfortunate about it. I don't really, because I don't test it out as often as I did initially, because it's for the same reason, is that a lot of times it doesn't offer enough for it to be useful to me, so I don't find myself experimenting with it as much as I did, say, 6 months ago. But hopefully, we keep our eye on this stuff, and hopefully we'll see more of that, and it'll be something that grows gradually in both my workflow and yours as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I should add that it's not all the developer's fault here. I do think that the entire system, the multi-window system, the way that it's designed, the way that it's activated, it's also Apple's fault. They do not make it easy for you to manage those multiple windows, or to mix and match windows and manage your spaces and create new spaces, or even have favorite spaces. So there's a lot that Apple should do to make the system easier to use and more powerful, because this is a pro feature. Most people do not need multiple windows on an iPad. So if it's a pro feature, at least you gotta make it really pro for those types of users who do need multiple windows. And right now, you can open multiple windows, but the way you manage them, it's not as powerful as on a Mac. So I do think it's also partly, at least, Apple's fault here. Before we move on to the next must-have feature, John, I also want to call out something that is slightly related to multi-window and multitasking. Drag and drop. It launched on iPad in iOS 11, still not available on iPhone between apps. You can support drag and drop within your own app on the iPhone. Some examples of these, Castro, for example, or Lear, native drag and drop you can implement on the iPhone. But of course, on iPad, you can drag and drop between different apps. And there's an entire, I will refer you back to the drag and drop chapter, or rather section of my iOS 11 review from 2017. There's going to be a link in the show notes. There's an entire technical explanation. It's the most technical thing I've ever written on MacStories, I think. An entire explanation of what exactly you can do with drag and drop in terms of like the drag items and the representations for data that you're dragging from one app to another. I think it's there's a lot to digest there. So I would love to see more implementations of drag and drop in modern apps, because it's something that I do quite often, actually. So between context menus and drag and drop, I do find myself long pressing a bunch of times every single day.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Direct Mail. If you're looking to grow your customer base, connect with fans, or build a following this year, a super cost-effective way to reach the people you want to reach is still email. For over 15 years, Direct Mail for Mac has been the go-to email marketing app for businesses, nonprofits, schools, and other organizations who want to expand their reach and connect with customers. It's designed just for the Mac, so you can get your work done in half the time using the technologies that you love. Things like drag and drop, keyboard shortcuts, integrations with other apps, and a whole lot more. Direct Mail has eye-catching templates, too, that are infinitely customizable and look great on all devices. Direct Mail also has a helpful customer service staff that's staffed by real humans. These aren't chatbots or AI, just friendly folks ready to help and at no extra charge. Send your first campaign today with a free download of Direct Mail. Listeners of this show will also receive 10% off all of their full-featured pricing plans. So head on over to directmailmac.com/appstories to experience the top-rated email marketing app for Mac and see how they can help your business grow. Again, that URL is directmailmac.com/appstories. Our thanks to Direct Mail for their support of the show. I want to raise with you something that comes up because you and I try out a bunch of apps all the time, and a lot of them require some sort of login. And I always feel like I've hit a speed bump when I get to a login and there's no way for me to use the keychain the iOS keychain to log in. And I have to go digging around for a password in 1Password or something. I mean, I think the adoption of this has been very high, but I still pretty regularly run into apps where, I have to do a login, and I know I have the login somewhere because there's like a website associated with it, and I can't do it without first going somewhere else to find that login email address and password, which is, it's a little baffling to me, I guess, because that's the worst possible time to throw a speed bump up for one of your customers, because when I hit that, I know my feeling is, I'll deal with this later. And a lot of times I'll just close the app. And if you use the iOS keychain, it's a great way to get people on board really fast.
Yeah. And I love it when, again, deliveries is a really good example. For years now, it's integrated with the iCloud keychain, with the system keychain, so that it detects whether you have a previous login saved in Safari for your JuneCloud account for deliveries, and just says, do you want to log in with this account? And that's it. It's literally like a single tap and you're in. So the keychain integration, and I mean, there's so much more that developers can do with the keychain now. Password rules. So if you're a developer and you want to let the user create an account using the iCloud keychain, which comes with automatic strong password suggestions, you can actually have custom rules for the kinds of password that you want to let the user create. Like, you want to have a set number of like uppercase characters, or do you want to disallow certain characters? You can do all of that with the iCloud Keychain, not only in your native apps, but also in your web apps using the WebKit integration. So it's really, really good. And I keep thinking, and it should be an article eventually, that the Keychain should be its own app on iOS. I really want to see a standalone iCloud Keychain app on my iPhone in iOS 14. And I should probably, again, write an article about this now that I'm done with a bunch of other things. Related to this, to logins and security, signing with Apple. This is a big highlight of WWDC 2019. We're starting to see this because new apps that offer multiple single sign-in options like Google and Facebook have to also support signing with Apple now. And there's a deadline coming up, I think it's in March, for developers of existing apps to add support for signing with Apple as well. And it's super easy. I used it in Fantastical. I used it in a bunch of different apps. It's really well done. You can hide your email and it works with Face ID. I love it. It's really a fantastic way to just create an account and let Apple worry about the details of whether you're exposing your email and your full name or not.
Yeah, I still see a lot of people on Twitter when they run across this saying, oh, this is the first time I've seen it. And I think that's because that deadline got pushed. I have run into it a handful of times, and it's just really handy. I like the option to do it. I mean, I know that when Fantastical was updated, that was the first time a lot of people had seen it, and that's because since they offer the other ways to log in, they had to do it because they already are subject to the deadline, unlike existing apps.
Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of other features that we've covered so many times on App Stories before.
I know.
So I'll just run through them real quick before we get to the end. File providers. I mean, if you're a document-based app, you want to be able to either integrate with files or offer your own file provider extension so that users can browse contents from your app, from the Files app, and from the document browser. Shortcuts with parameters. Again, highlight of iOS 13. I would add to this, it's not just about supporting parameters, so like having actions that can be configured inside a shortcut by the user with variables and whatnot, but also to support pre-fill for those parameters. So like if you have an action that deals with different features or data from your app, you can actually pass a list of options for that parameter, and you can let the user choose from those options. An example of this, Scriptable has an action called run script, and when you tap on the empty parameter for the script, it actually loads a list of all your existing scripts that live in the Scriptable app. So you can choose from them. You don't have to type the file name of the script. Or, for example, pcalc, you can choose from a list of operations that are supported for converting between units or currencies. So like you can, if you're a developer, you can actually pass a built-in list of existing options to pre-fill a parameter. Also, Timery. Timery is really good. It lets you pick projects and tags and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Versions and local backups. This is a little more specific. iCloud versions have actually been an API available in iCloud Drive for several years now.
Yes.
MindNode was the first app to support this. Now, iWriter also supports versions and local backups. I think if you're a document-based app, especially considering all the sync issues that we've seen with iCloud Drive since iOS 13, you do want to look into this, to let the user restore a previous version of a document from iCloud or offer a local backup option, which is what iWriter does. Because in case something goes wrong and iCloud Drive fails to save your edit to an iCloud document, you still have a local backup. So a local copy that does not sync anywhere that you write as a backup, as an additional copy of a document. AirPlay 2, I mean, this is obvious one. It's so much better than AirPlay 1. It means faster connections to AirPlay 2 speakers like HomePods and longer buffering times, so that even if you're not in buffering distance of an AirPlay 2 speaker, maybe you want to take the trash outside or you want to walk around the house because you live in a really big house, you're still going to be able to hear your music or podcasts coming out of the HomePod because the buffering time is longer. HomeKit for home automation devices. I mean, you do want to support HomeKit as much as possible.
Right.
I mean, there's potential for different solutions coming down the road, especially now that there's that alliance between Apple and different manufacturers with the, what's it called, chip, the connected home over IP.
Yes, very good.
So in theory, maybe in the future, we will get something that will bridge HomeKit to other devices that are not HomeKit compatible, basically like an official home bridge from Apple. But for now, please just support HomeKit. It's the most open source it's ever been. You can take a look at the open source documentation from Apple available for like the HomeKit access protocol and all that kind of stuff. And you can integrate your existing product with HomeKit. And custom app icons. When this was first announced, I think it was in iOS 12 or 11, I was really skeptical. I was like, why would I ever want to change the icon of an app? The icon was a sacred type of thing that you were never, you weren't supposed to change the icon. But now I've kind of grown to love the option, and I do like the fact that I can choose from multiple icons, because maybe I don't like the default icon provided by the developer, and the developer knows about this, so multiple options are available. And here, I would like to call out, again, three examples. Timery, it's a pretty simple icon, but it comes with a bunch of different color options for its glyph on a white background. You can choose the color of the glyph. Fantastical, it lets you choose from the entire collection of fantastical icons from version 1, 2, and the new icon, as well as some new options. And, I mean, of course, the king of the hill here, Apollo. Apollo has an incredible collection of custom icons. Some of them created by the developer Christian Selig, others commissioned by Christian to really talented designers. And in the latest version 1.7, there's a community pack. So the community pack, which you can buy as an in-app purchase, or it's also part of the Apollo Ultra paid plan. The community pack is icons made and shared by the Apollo community on Reddit. So Christian has chosen some of the best icons from the community, and there's the community pack is now available in Apollo. There's so many excellent choices in Apollo. It's really something that if you're thinking about offering different and artistic and weird and funny versions of your icon, definitely do take a look at Apollo.
Yeah, I think I would add to that also the reader icons, because there's only like 11 of them, but I like the fact that there's a bunch of different choices between, I guess the default is the modern gray one with kind of stripes and a star, but I prefer just the red background with a gradient, which looks nice on my home screen. And there's a blue version and a gold version. It's nice, and a few different designs. That's one of the ones that I like changing every now and then.
All right, last two, John.
Last two, go for it.
Last two. All right, I want to mention this one, rich links. Again, this is a new API for developers in iOS 13. It's part of I believe it is called the Link Presentation Framework. You can look it up on the Apple developer website. This is a fun show, John, about talking about APIs and frameworks.
That's right.
As you would say,
we haven't done that in a while.
Is it? So, in my continuing exploration of American expressions, is this where you would say this is my cup of tea?
It is your cup of tea. I think that one might, the cup of tea, I don't know. Maybe that's a Britishism. I don't know. But
really?
It's
because the British, they do like
they drink
tea.
they enjoy their tea, but it is something we say here too. So you've got that one right too. You're doing very well. Gold star.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. So yes, in iOS 13, if your app deals with links, with URLs, you don't have to, and really you shouldn't, display them as a raw HTTPS, URLs. You can actually display them as rich links. And rich links, the best way to imagine the way that they will look like, take a look at what happens when you share a link in iMessage, or when you append a Safari webpage to Apple Notes using the Notes extension. That's a rich link, like a link that contains the domain name and the title of the page, and usually an image or a video, like a preview, like a visual preview of the page, which for context, it tends to be the Open Graph hero image or the Open Graph video tag. But in any case, these are so much better than just having a raw plain text URL. And in fact, I want to call out like this is a recent discovery from the MacStories team.
How did you find this is what I want to know, because this one just came out of the blue.
It was featured somewhere on the App Store. So really,
Okay.
App Store person that discovered this app and put it in a section, thank you, because this is exactly the kind of app that speaks to me. The app is called Noto. It's Noto. It's a note-taking app that it's very simple. It's got its custom sidebar, and in fact, this app actually doesn't follow some of the suggestions that we've talked about here. Like it's got its own custom context menu, which I don't like. It's got its own custom selection system for text, which arguably may be better than Apple's new text selection system in iOS 13, but I wanna test it some more. But what this app does is a bunch of things that I really like. One of them, when you go in and you paste a link that you just copied from Safari, either with a copy and paste menu or with Command V, if you're using an external keyboard, it gets pasted into the note, not as a URL, but as a rich link. Like as soon as you paste, it generates a rich link.
I don't think I've ever seen another app that does that.
I've never seen any other app do this, and it's really good. It's what it should be. Like, let's forget about these plain text raw URLs and actually have a visual presentation for them. Yep. Also, by the way, we're probably going to end up reviewing this app on MacStories soon, but as a preview, this app does as one feature that I've never seen done anywhere else, and that I actually mentioned this on my podcast Adapt with Ryan, which is so funny that I later, just a few days after that,
right,
I discovered that this app existed. You can create tables, so that's not new, right? You can create tables in Apple Notes too, but in Noto, you can have a table that you can mix and match text and images within a table. You can have a table with images and rich text all together in the same table. And not only that, but you can adjust the size of the image inside the cell. And you can, John, this is amazing. You can even have videos inside tables. Yes.
That is wild. You know, I was certain that someone had sent you a link to this app after Adapt, because I heard that episode. Yeah.
No, I was browsing the App Store. And I was like, wait a second. Is that a table with images?
Sure enough, it was, right? Not just images, but even videos. That's incredible.
Oh, the last one is all for you, John, because you're an old man. And you
because I am an old person. You know what? Sometimes you need bigger text. And I have been fighting this battle. I've been trying to keep my text on my devices as small as possible. But, you know, one of the places that drives me crazy is in email apps. I wish that more third-party clients used dynamic text, because you know what? Your eyesight goes down as you get older, and sometimes you just need to boost it up another notch or two. And I wish more apps use this. I think most developers are doing a very good job of this, though, admittedly. So
I made fun of you, but actually I also have the same problem because
I know you and I are both wearing glasses, and we both don't see as well as we used to do in our 20s, right?
Yeah, it's gotten bad. But yeah, dynamic text. I mean, it's amazing. And you can also, actually, if you're an accessibility user, you can also enable the larger accessibility sizes in settings. So I think it's really important for non-accessibility users, and especially for accessibility users, that you support dynamic text. I mean, come on, this feature came out like 5-6 years ago. It's the right thing to do. Do not roll, as much as possible, I would say, do not roll your own custom text layout. Rely on the system one as much as possible. And I know that TextKit and you know, text fields have gotten their own share of issues over the years, but really do try to follow the system one, because you don't want to have a custom text system that does not support accessibility stuff on iOS.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Federico, I think that's a great place to stop. That was a fun episode. There's a lot.
Yeah,
we packed a lot in that 40 minutes or so. All right. Well, I want to thank our two sponsors again. That's Linode and Direct Mail. And of course, you can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram. He's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOOR HWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.